So welcome everyone. This is a technical leads meeting for folks who really have been involved in all the different sort of groups and phases of the demand and capacity modelling work that we've been supporting with NHP schemes, and we wanted really to invite as many people as we could to talk about some of the comparative work that we have done and that we're doing, and some of the work that we're progressing in relation to the app as well. So there's a number of colleagues from the strategy unit on the call. Hopefully you recognise some of us. I've worked with some of you before. There's some familiar faces on the call, so it's nice to see you. And my colleague Rachel in a moment is going to just give us a bit of an outline in terms of the areas that we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation for probably about sort of 15-20 minutes in terms of just walking through some of the info that we have for you, and then we'll open it out broadly into questions and discussion. If you've got any points or queries as we go, if you want to drop those into the chat, I might call upon my colleague Josh to try and help coordinate some of those, collate some of those, and we'll try and pick those up as part of this. Just a couple of reminders for you. For those who are still progressing through the modelling, and my computer's decided to be slightly awkward now, sorry about that. Just a reminder really, I know for those of you who are regular attenders to these sessions, you'll have seen this slide before, but just to remind you that the project information site is the best place to visit in terms of most up-to-date information and references on all the elements of the model. So hopefully you know where that is and that's not a big surprise. And if you get stuck or you need help, as ever, please get in touch with your model relationship manager in the first instance, and we will try and help make sense of your question, if not answer your question straight away. That's what we can promise you today. So thank you for that. We're going to move, Rachel, we're going to move to you, I think, first to give us a bit of a sense of the comparative work that we have been developing. I have your slide deck, so I can share it or you can. You've got it there, that's perfect. So
I don't
Rachel,
need
you don't need me. There we are. I can be. I can just sit back and relax, perhaps.
Yeah,
but over to you. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, James. So, like James says, to make sure I'm not on mute or doing anything silly. Yeah. So various of you will have received some information which we make them under the heading of comparative information. And this is information from data derived from the demand and capacity model, which could be the inputs that other trusts have put into those models, their own models around mitigators, or it could be outputs from those trusts as well. I think so far mostly we have shared some information about some of those values around the mitigators, but the idea is bearing in mind that there is a lot of data that goes into the model and obviously the outputs from the models that would be very useful for trusts and for schemes, NHP teams, and indeed the strategy unit colleagues as well, to see and use on a routine basis, and that is more easily accessible to you. So that's the purpose of this. I'm calling it a project, but we're aiming to develop the NHP demand and capacity comparator resource. And I'll just briefly say what the purpose names of that process are in a moment, and then we're going to go on to look at what we've got already. Some of this has been shared with you on an ad hoc basis, and but I really want to get to today, if we do have time, is we want to have a better understanding of our audience and what their needs are, and to rephrase that, that's you and what are your needs in relation to data that we could share with you from the model. So hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion on that. It's going to be following the information from my colleagues about what we have in fact got already. So the purpose of this is, I've said really, is to enable all stakeholders to use comparative data to inform decisions and get the most out of the demand and capacity model. So that's data from all trusts. That's not just about the data that you input yourself, obviously, and the outputs you get from your own trusts and schemes. And the aim is to give access to a range of data across all trusts. Mitigator values and strategies are just one example of that. And in the short term, this is about creating a resource to share that data, to benchmark in a clear and easy to understand way, with a clear purpose, audience, and a process for delivery, and also a methodology. So you'll see how that's been derived, and a contact for further information and support. And in the longer term, this is something we'd like to develop by way of it could be a comparative data analysis work stream, and a resource, an ongoing resource to provide that access to comparative data and support. So the reports or the resources that we have available at the moment, and I've labelled them report 1 to 5 just for the, so it looks neat and tidy, but there are several of these which we're going to be talking about in a little bit more detail. They may not be in this order, but essentially we have 3 spreadsheets. The first 2 you may have seen. We have an app which has been developed, which is interactive, which some of you have seen, and then there is a report that is produced which essentially informs some of the round table discussions which some of you will have been part of to date. So I'm going to move us on now to, and I may have got the order wrong, and that's fine, but so I think, Jack, would you like to go through the spreadsheet that you produced and that is used by some schemes?
Yeah, do you want me to? Do you want me to share it? Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, you can just.
Yeah,
yes.
I wasn't sure if you had a like.
Don't have that. No, you should share your screen.
Right, that's fine. Let me just.
Thanks, Jack.
Just share my screen. You see that?
Yes, yeah. Perfect.
Cool. Okay, right. So this is just oh, 1 second. So there's a little heater whirring in the background, probably really annoying for you. This is
Jack. Can I just add? So if folks can't read or see that properly, there's a good trick in Teams. If you press Control and use your thumb wheel, you can zoom into the content that's being shared. So if you don't know that, you know that now. So sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So this is just a front sheet that explains the document. I'm going to just skip past that, and then hopefully you can see the rest of it. I'll explain what that front sheet said now while I'm talking. So for those of you who have got to the stage of writing a final report, then what this report does is it takes some of the information that appears in the final report. So various places throughout the document there are various numbers quoted and calculations made reference to throughout that report. And the original purpose of this report was to bring all those numbers into one place for all the schemes who had started the process of writing their report, so that in one place we could make some comparisons across the different schemes. That's it. It's in a nutshell. It's information which is already appears in the report, but it's just pulled into one place so that you can look at it and compare across the scheme more easily. So it includes a number of items down here, such as the demographic growth, the non-demographic growth, the impact of mitigation, the overall impact. And one of the things about this schemes is because you've got different horizon years often, the information that appears in your report we wouldn't be able to make a comparison between a scheme with a horizon year of 2041 and a scheme with a horizon year of 2037, for example. And what these calculations do is they express the information as a compound annual growth rate, so that it's possible to make comparisons between and across the schemes. And the other information, we've color coded it so that where the report has been finalized, we have one shade of color. Where the report is just been generated, but it's not even have much work done on it yet, then it's a red color, and the orange ones are reports that are in draft. There's also another tab of information which looks at the top 10 mitigators, the top 10 inpatient mitigators, so that whilst the actual numbers that are shown here aren't comparable across the schemes because every scheme is a different size, what it does allow us to do is see, for example, that these 4 schemes here all have the same mitigator contributing the largest amount of mitigation in for efficiency terms for inpatient bed days. So it's not about looking at the amounts of data, the amounts of mitigation. It's just looking at which mitigators are impacting the most, and looking at schemes at that. And then also there's some more detailed definitions of how each of the numbers that appear in have been arrived at, calculated, an explanation of the maths behind the compound annual growth rate calculation, and a few notes about version and what's changed about each different version that I've produced of the report. And as far as the frequency of updating it, then it's been a sort of evolving report that was originally generated for our own use, but what happens now is when we populate the data and information into the first draft of your final report, a byproduct of that process is that the numbers that go into this report are also generated, so we're able to update it and add to it relatively quickly.
That's really helpful, Jack. Thanks very much for that. So I suppose that that's one of the examples of sort of the emergent process of us establishing some really useful resources that we've found to be really helpful when we're having conversations and feeding back to schemes and others and so on. And we can see that there's, I'm thinking, it'd be great if, and I think lots of people think that as well. So what we and so that will allow us, as we're sort of moving towards something which is a bit more, I suppose, harmonized or consolidated, we'll be sort of factoring some of those things in. That's really helpful. Thanks, Jack. So I think we're going to move on to Jake now. Am I right? Do we have Jake in the room?
I'm here, Rachel. Yes, thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk briefly about one of the reports that we produce. So can people see my screen shared there?
Yes.
Okay, so this is quite a basic report which just shows for each scheme who have submitted mitigators, and for each of the mitigators the midpoint of their assumption for each of those mitigators that they've set, and it allows you to do a few things really. So the first thing it allows you to do is you can look at individual mitigators. So if you just take the top one here, an A&E mitigator, you can see at a glance the mitigator value that you set, the assumption value that you set, compared to all of the trusts who have also set that mitigator. So this first one, you can see that for Royal Preston, they've set a mitigator of a 25% reduction, which is illustrated here by 0.75, and that compares to the three other trusts who have set that mitigator. So you can immediately see that where you you sit in comparison to others? Are you higher or lower? And that's illustrated by the color shading. So red indicates a more ambitious assumption, and a dark blue represents a less ambitious assumption. So you can see where you sit comparatively against others who have set that mitigator. You can also see how many other trusts have set that mitigator. So in this case, only 4 out of the 15 or so who have set trusts have actually set that mitigator. So not everyone tends to set it, which I think is useful. So you can look at each individual mitigator in that way and compare how you sit compared to others, which is clearly a useful thing to do. The other thing that the report allows you to do is very clearly at a glance see how you compare with others in terms of the number of mitigators that you've set. So it's arranged left to right in terms of the number of mitigators that have been set. So you can see that Royal Preston has set the most of the 91 mitigators, whereas Torbay has set the least mitigators. So again, you can very quickly see where you sit in terms of the numbers of mitigators you've set in comparison to others. The color coding also allows you to see overall how ambitious you've generally being. So you can see that perhaps James Paget here, most of their mitigators that they've set are at the red or orange end of the spectrum, with very few at the blue end, which suggests that they've been particularly ambitious in their mitigators and also have set a large number of them. Whereas in comparison to somewhere like Epsom, most of their mitigators are towards the blue-green end of the spectrum, suggesting that they've been a bit more conservative in their assumptions that they've set. Important to note here that we're not making judgments about the mitigators. So at this point, we're not saying that people who have been really ambitious, they're the good ones. Absolutely not. But it is just to inform him, because you can clearly see that there is wide variation on most of the mitigators in terms of what trusts think are feasible, which again is clearly useful information and allows trusts to reflect on their own mitigators and whether they might think the level that they've set is at the right level. So as I say, it's a fairly simple report, but I think it is a useful one. What it doesn't do is provide any information on the uncertainty around the assumptions. It simply provides the midpoint. So some of the uncertainty around the assumptions is provided in another report that we can share with you. Just to mention as well, this report, it was produced as a one-off from the data. It's produced manually rather than automatically, and we anticipate that this will be incorporated into the automatically generated report that I think Matt is going to share with you in a moment. The reason it was done in this way is it was just to make it as easy as and as useful for people as possible, whilst the more automated report was undergoing some development. So it's a stopgap that ultimately will be incorporated into that other report.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, we have a couple of stopgaps, don't we? But I think that's also useful because we've been testing them for sort of weeks and sort of levels of usefulness and everything. Yeah, really important to point out, like you did, and Karen's amplified in the comments. This isn't a right or wrong thing. It's just we're just sort of presenting the data as it's been used. And one or two of the schemes are at different stages as well. Some in your report, some aren't final. For example, Preston and Lancaster, they're at their first attempt at this, so they're going through that iteration process at the moment. And the other thing just to point out in terms of the numbers is some people with some of the mitigators have already done a lot, or there's already been a significant impact since the 1920 baseline, so that's being reflected in what they are still able to achieve going forward. Now that's really helpful, and it's another example of something that we are trying to incorporate into a more automated process, and we'll be harvesting the most useful and informative resources that we have, and then expanding on that as well as we sort of move into providing something which is going to, on an ongoing basis, sort of be supporting people as we go forward. Thank you, Jake. So we've got out of those 5 reports that I showed at the beginning, I think we have one more left that we're going to be going through in a little bit more detail, and I think that's going to be Matt. Matt, are you with us? I do
in the
hope
room,
so.
yes.
Woohoo!
Hello. So I'm going to share my screen now as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Lovely. So you should see my browser window now.
Yeah.
As has been trailed a few times, what we've got here is something very much under development. A few folks may have seen this on the call, but the majority probably won't have. The idea here is to take some of those things that we've seen so far from Jake and a few other bits and bobs related to the input mitigators and try and present those in various ways. And the idea here is that this is automated so that every time there is a new scenario, which is considered to be the sort of final scenario ready for the outputs report, or one that has been marked as being the kind of initial scenario, that information automatically ends up going in here, so it's live effectively. We don't have to keep updating it; it will always be up to date. And what you can see in front of you is the kind of homepage that we have so far, with a bit of information about how to use it. You'll notice a big warning box, which is currently on this thing because it's currently in development. But otherwise, this works very much as a sort of interactive web app where on this left-hand side, there is a panel of settings which allow you to choose various schemes, choose various mitigators. At the moment, we have some other settings as well. So what we have to start with is if I go to this point ranges tab here, what happens is we can see charts immediately. And in this case, this is a point range chart showing you the midpoint in the dot and then the range. So this is the high and low selected from the inputs app. This is expressed here as the percent of activity mitigated for EASE. So for example, in this top row, we have Airedale at about 50% mitigation that was input to the inputs app. And there's a variety of things we can do with the various settings that I mentioned on this far left. So we can decide to include or exclude any number of schemes who have or who have completed their mitigators, or we can choose to just look at what are considered to be the peers, the identified peers for each of the schemes. And these are the peers that you'll see as you enter the inputs app and you see the map on the right-hand side. You can change the focal scheme here on the left as well. And what that will do is it will reselect those peers and also will highlight the individual scheme in the charts in red. So, for example, if I just turn all those back on, so we have all schemes, we then have the ability to change the sets of mitigators we're looking at, and there's various kind of filters here, so we can look at various groupings. So this is a mitigator group of hospital activity amenable to medicines management, for example, and you can see that the charts have updated as I've clicked these. If you'd like to switch back to seeing purely the input values, the 80% prediction intervals from the inputs app rather than percent of activity mitigated, you can click between the two. It's effectively an inversion, but it perhaps makes most sense to talk about percentage of activity mitigated. So that's the default for now. Within the plot area as well, we have some additional settings. So as mentioned by Jack earlier, there's the idea of being able to standardize to a given year. Different schemes will be setting mitigators to different years. So, at first glance, they may not be appropriate for comparison directly. So that just allows us to extrapolate linearly for a better comparison. We can also do a number of other things in here as well. We can look at this by scheme rather than by mitigator. So this just effectively flips the chart if that's useful. And then we can also introduce the national elicitation exercise range as well and overlay that with box plots just to get a bit of a reference against that. And then for sake of being able to arrange the plots, there's a number of additional features here, but I'll skip over those and go straight to the ability to show a summary. So this adds at the bottom a summarization of the points that you have chosen as part of your chart. And again, you can switch here between showing the maximum and minimum as the range on that summary point range indicator, or otherwise the average of that range. So this is the point range charts I was just showing. I'll go over to heat maps, as this was just mentioned a moment ago by Jake. And we've got something sort of similar. And the idea here is that given the schemes and the mitigators that we selected, these could be shown over in this chart here, which again is coloured by the sort of intensity, the amount mitigated. And once more, we can make some more choices over here in this settings panel. So we can choose to see the range, for example, the low end of the value selected, the high end of the value selected, or the midpoint. We can also look at this in a binary way just to see whether people did or did not select that particular mitigator. There's also in here some summaries, which are tables, which can show you things like, in this case, the proportion of schemes that used each mitigator. So this particular mitigator was selected by 70% of all schemes. And of those selected from our settings on the left, you can see whether it's higher or lower as a result. And then also we've got scheme coverage here as well, which is similar, but in this case, it's on the basis of proportion of mitigators used by each scheme, as mentioned by Jake. Those in bold here are those that were selected from the side panel, and in red is our focus scheme as well. And we can begin to sort of do things like sort these by coverage and some other interactive things like being able to select from individual schemes. We can also take a look at the raw data itself that underpins everything, and that's available for download, so that can be taken away for more work to be done. We have lookups for mitigators and schemes in here as well. And there's a few kind of interactive features that are quite useful here. I mean, obviously, you can do things like expand and contract the size of the plots on screen, expand to full size, this kind of thing, which might be quite helpful if there's a lot of information on the page. And then there's also the ability to bookmark the page as it is with all the selections you've made, so that you can return to it at a later time. So you can just copy the URL and then return to that later. So you can imagine taking a few of those bookmarks with various different settings in place and use that as a way to walk through what others are doing under given sets of mitigators, and hopefully that will make it a little easier to have a look at very specific aspects, very specific mitigators, very specific schemes that you may be interested in. So I'll stop there. I mean, there's more to come, especially with respect to thinking about how this fits into things like what we're calling mitigator credibility, and the idea of how ambition might play a part in the selections that have been made given the baselines of each individual scheme. But that's a kind of quick run through. Hopefully that shows some promise, and yeah, we'd be interested to hear in any thoughts that people may have.
That's really helpful, Matt. Thanks very much for that. So some of you will have seen that before, which, as Matt has said, is in development. We can, of course, I should have talked to James actually about how we're going to take the next part, and in fact how much time I've got of today's session. I just had if it's okay, James, I have a few questions for people.
Yeah, I was going to say, so there are two other elements, aren't there? Two other reports that we don't have someone to speak to, but we can outline what they are in a moment. But perhaps now is a good point at which to just invite some questions, and then perhaps you can pose the questions you have. Do you want to do it that way, or do you want to ask yours first?
Well, yeah, if anyone's got any questions, just fire away.
Oh, there we are. Jonathan's got on straight away. Look, there he is.
I thought I'd take the opportunity. I guess one point, I think this is brilliant stuff, and obviously there's a lot of value in having all this information on a comparable basis. I suspect Craig has probably beaten me to it, but I think that there is something about actually how we use this information. And I was just sort of thinking through as you were presenting the slides. I mean, we could all be aiming for the same target, like a SDEC target or a non-face-to-face target or what have you. You may be in very different starting points, and therefore the level of ambition may be very different. So I think without that extra dimension of some degree of, whether you want to call it standardization or whatever it is, that just sort of recognizes the fact that we're starting from different points, even if we're all aiming for the same point, Someone putting in a 35% mitigation might be because actually they're doing really poorly, not because they're very ambitious and it's a good thing. It might be, for different reasons. So I think that's just one thing to think very carefully about how information is compared and contrasted. I think the other one, this is a point of detail, and I don't want to take up the meeting with this, but one of the reports had the values for the step changes, individual mitigator changes, the bed days, admissions, what have you, avoided. And it's some of you will be aware it's a live conversation with us. There's obviously this issue of the model interaction term and how that gets apportioned. I'm not sure whether, in terms of the reports that you've shared, whether that is actually the end value that is the target for mitigation. So people are now starting to think about, how do we operationalize this? How do we deliver these targets? What does it mean? What are we aiming for? If the answer is 4,000 bed days, does that include the model interaction target or not? And I'm suspecting it's not, because the conversations I've had is it's very difficult to actually disentangle that. So again, it just feels like maybe if that is the case, there's a health warning about what those numbers actually mean, that they actually aren't the end of the story. There is a bit more on top potentially to go at. So I think that they were the 2 points I just wanted to make.
So just in general, I think we'll be very careful about how information is shared and sort of who receives it, and do as much as we can to avoid any sort of misinterpretation of what is there. And we do have some work to do to make sure that things are shared and explained in that context, and totally sort of taking on board the different start points to schemes and the impact that will have on what is needed to be achieved versus what's sort of been achieved already. I just wondered, Jake or Jack, are you able to say anything about the second point?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Those are both really helpful points. The model interaction term, it's complicated, as you say, and there's no easy way to allocate that interaction across mitigators, because it's impossible to apportion accurately. One of the things it's reasonable to do is to apportion it proportionally across the mitigators. So if a particular mitigator is having a large effect, you would proportionally allocate that model interaction factor to that, which would give you something indicative. But that's all it would be. So I think you're right. That interaction term should probably be incorporated into targets and things for reduction, but that's probably the best method we can advise at the moment. I mean, in lots of cases the model interaction term isn't huge anyway, so hopefully in most cases it shouldn't be an issue, but where it is big, because it can be big, particularly where it's positive, you should probably proportion it in some way, apportion it.
Actually, and that's kind of, I think, where we'd concluded. Yeah, that's helpful. I think just to recognise that there is a bit more to go at, I guess, rather than just the headline numbers that are in that report.
Yeah. And I think your comment around making sure that we put some narrative around some of these reports to ensure that they're not used in the wrong way, so taking account of the fact that someone might have set an ambitious assumption because they're particularly bad at that indicator, probably needs to go along with any reports. So that's a really helpful suggestion.
I guess just the other one is where absolute numbers are being talked about, some of those will reflect the size of the organisation as well, and maybe there is some sort of scaling that just needs to be thought about. If a big two organisations make the same value in as a percentage mitigation, but actually if one's 3 times the size of the other, they end up with a different number that's very different on the face of it. You'll think, why is that one so big? And if you don't know the organisation and how big it is, you could draw the wrong conclusion, I guess, is my point.
Yeah, there was a similar comment in the chat around how we use this information and make sure it's used positively rather than as a stick to beat people with, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And providing all that contextual information wherever this data or reports go is really, really important. It was the first thing I thought when I saw the spreadsheet which had the actual numbers on. I just thought, that's a big hospital and that one isn't a big hospital. You just and that's easy for us to accommodate. We can easily sort of make those sort of small adjustments to make those relative and sort of or make it a rate, or we can do all sorts of things to make them more comparable. That's really helpful. If there's no other sort of questions, and obviously we're developing a resource, a process, a level of support so that people can make good decisions, better decisions based on this information. So it isn't to design a KPI framework up against sort of to assess anybody or anything, but it's not for that at all. So I know I'm sharing my screen, and before I sort of invite one or two sort of comments around how people would want to help us develop the resource in terms of what you want to use it for and so on. I think Josh has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add in that I think we're aware also that one of the big values in the model is that the outputs are kind of a distribution of activity, and obviously, like Jonathan's saying, with those figures that we have in terms of those estimates, they're based on the principal projection, so they're kind of point estimates. So that's kind of lost slightly. That we understand that's going to be, there'll be a distribution behind that, and that would be informed by the range that people have. So yeah, that's another one of the caveats that would go to that. It kind of maybe gives them a misleading level of certainty on kind of the volume of activity that is being estimated to be mitigated. But sorry, Rachel, yeah, carry on.
That's fine. I can see there's a couple of comments in the chat, so we just wanted to maybe sort of follow up on a couple of things, because we don't really know necessarily all the time what people are thinking and feeling about some of the resources that are being shared and how they might be used. But we know how we don't want them to be used, and I think that's quite clear from that. Yeah, so really we've got various things that we're sort of have tested, and we've talked to lots of people. But essentially, this is only to produce something which is going to be useful for you, and so it's your help. Probably won't get to the bottom of this today, and we've got some ideas, starters for 10 on what we think you would most positively be able to use this and data like this was. So this is data about other trusts. How would you use it? How to greatest effect and benefit? So Peter.
Thank you. I put my hand up because of the last comment and how it's used and stuff like that, because Craig and Jonathan know this, that it was used against us in actually, why are you different to James Paget? Because we're neighbouring hospitals, we've got different demographics, we've got different levels of service delivery. And then we had to sit down, and I had to get Jonathan and Craig do a lot of work so I could explain with Diane in front of our chief execs why there was a difference between the two. And that was really difficult sometimes, because we're not specialty by specialty specialists, want of a better phrase. And so it is getting used as a performance tool. And I think, as you and Jonathan's articulated, it needs that backup data, how big they are, where you are in terms of that service delivery, before that gets then put in front of you and saying, you're not doing enough, you're doing too much. In its shortest, between two hospitals, not necessarily in the widest sense, but actually pick out two hospitals, put them together, and then sit down forever and try to explain that actually I've got a better physician or a better consultant on frail and elderly than you have. It's really difficult.
It's really not designed for that. Isn't designed for that. No. So we'll have to make it absolutely clear. And no doubt this is something that we'll probably will be looking into just to make sure that the tools are being used appropriately. And in fact, well, regardless of the tools, the data is being used for its intended purpose, which is really important.
It is, and also it's really complex, isn't it?
It's not. That's not sensible. That's not. It's it is complex. It's complicated. and it's sort of it's a bit of a blunt tool to, as a form of sort of comparison. But I'll shut up before I get myself in trouble. So, but that's something that we will certainly investigate, or at least sort of going forward. Thank you very much for raising the awareness of that, because that's really important, and it will help us make sure that we get this right in terms of what we share and with whom we share it, and make sure that the purpose of it is clear as well. So this is just me. So I've got discussion here if anybody wants to sort of contribute to this at all, but really this is just this is with the positive intent of the data, the rich data of both the inputs, the information that gets input into the model, and of course the outputs as well. So it's really using this information in a way that for information that hasn't been available before. This data hasn't been available before, certainly not in this format. So if anybody has any ideas on who they feel that the key audience should be for this data, and the kinds of questions you would be able to answer using this data, feel free to have that chat with me either now or outside of this meeting. Has anybody got any comments right now? Peter, you're on mute.
We are about to start the process of, again, in really engaging with individuals that are going to support the mitigators. But and then this is just really to explain to everybody else what we're doing with it. And then sure. we're going to have to use that, and we're going to have specific plans of how we're going to deliver those mitigators for our outline business case. So it is very important, because we are told that the NHP model is, or your model is, the only model that we can use in terms of our business cases, and therefore we do need to get it right. And we're going to do a significant amount of work on those mitigators, and also the plans to deliver them. Because in the past we thought, oh, this is the strategy that will make it happen, but now we've got to have a plan in that strategy to say, well, actually we're going to do this, this, and this, and that's going to make it happen. And that is really difficult, because we're looking into the future about saying, well, actually we'll reduce it by 25%. For instance, but are those plans that where's the evidence to say that those plans are going to reduce it by 25%, not 50% or 10%? And that's our difficult bit. But we have to have a base to start with, because the currency within the NHS and NHP is beds, and therefore we have to have what are we aiming for? Are we too big, too small? And it's all around beds, which is a shame, but because there are lots of other things that happen in the hospital other than people going into a bed. But it is it is so important that we along with you, we get this right for this next time as well, because this one, during the outline business case, it sets the whole project in terms of how long it's going to be and how much it's going to cost to build. So it is critical that we do, we hone down, we fully understand everything that's happening in the model, because we then have to turn it into a plan, or work with the individuals that are going to have to turn it into a plan.
Absolutely. That's well said, and thanks for sharing, because there will be others in the same place, or will be in the future, and having those links to those strategies, those plans that actually will cash out in the way that you are saying that they will is incredibly important. We've developed an evidence map, because we've seen this, that the need to go alongside this and support is helping people to make sure that they've got the best evidence on what is likely to work. We know that some of the biggest mitigators are those which are health and system-wide, and those are the ones that sometimes have have less evidence around, because it's just simply not there, or you've got that many stakeholders. It gets more complicated, but they are associated quite often with those areas where you want to make those biggest activity mitigations. So no, that's really important. And like you say, it is critical to get it right, to make sure that anything that you are saying that you are going to deliver, which will result in a change to the size of the hospital, that we do as much as we can in this planning phase to make it as accurate as possible. So thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you. I'll just keep saying thank you, Peter, because you talked to me, and so that's really important to me. Thank you. Right. Okay. Well, I think I'm done. I did have just a couple of extra considerations which I've gone over before I hand back to James. So I think this is just what I've been saying really, is just making sure that we're working with you to make sure it is actually fit for purpose. Thinking about developing a community of practice, so we've got different people using it and sort of feeding into this process on an ongoing basis. There's one or two other things here. So certainly there's something about training, so that people are not, we don't create something that's too complicated for people to use. So it's something that is very accessible and actually does what we need it to do, then, and that people can interpret it. Then we know we've talked about how important that is. The interpretation of this data and information is actually is also critical. And we can do some follow-ups to see how this is being used in the future. We're not quite there yet. And I mentioned linking with the evidence map. So this is what I'll be doing next. I'm defining the audience just to make sure that we're capturing everybody who needs this information, and we will prioritise it to those who need it now. And then providing that sort of interim solution and sharing that comparative information. I've said less than a week, and I think Cameron's already said we're going to send something out today, tomorrow. So it'll just be those first two pieces, those first two spreadsheets, and then defining that the ideal solution and the time scale for that as well. So I'll stop sharing now, and thank you everybody for contributing to that. It's been really useful. And back over to James.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. There were are you able just to bring up the slide that's got the 5 kind of reports on, just because that's got a helpful prompt in terms of those pieces, and so there are 2 others, aren't there, which you touched on, I think, but do you want to just say a little more about those as well, just in terms of what they are? I'm not going to ask you to go through them, because I know we're not on the detail of it as such, but yeah, so 4 and 5, I think it's 4 and 5, isn't it? No.
Yeah, that's right, 3 and 5.
Yeah. 3 and 5, sorry, yes.
Yeah. So there's one that was just lovingly called the toy model, which was essentially this was developed by Jake, so he could talk to that more, but just for so we can talk about it more quickly. I think it's a spreadsheet which has been designed to use within a room of stakeholders to try things out in real time, and just to sort of model certain aspects, certain impacts of certain scenarios, if you like. So that's what that is. It's essentially a spreadsheet, and it's not fully evolved. It's only been used once or twice. So I think we're going to be utilising or accommodating the purpose. So why was that designed, and thinking about how we could sort of take that forward. The 5th one here, so report 5. Now this is something which several of you may have seen an example of, and was designed, I understand, to specifically support roundtable discussions. So it includes a lot of the information that was in the Matt's the app that Matt presented on the mitigator comparison app, and it summarises them and gives some sort of interpretation to them in terms of some of the key points which come from that, which I think is really, really important actually, because something that also provides some narrative is also going to influence people's understanding of the data and information which is being presented. So those are the other 2 which I sort of mentioned on that list before.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Rachel, for just outlining those. So we've got just about 10 minutes left. I'm just really conscious that I don't know if there are other points or questions that folks have. Tony, you've got your hand up.
Just really to ask the evidence map that you talked about, where's that? Where would I find that? Is that at a point of sharing, or is that in development? Sorry, it might be obvious to everyone else. I just wasn't sure.
No, that's an excellent question. And when I say that, that's because I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think we are in a position to share it. I think it was in development, of course, but I think we are in a position to share it. We've shared it to a small number of people, so maybe when we send out those 2 example spreadsheets or reports, I can add that as well. But when I do, or when we do share that, would really like some feedback on how useful it is to you, because this was designed by our specialists, our knowledge specialists in-house, and so we do want to make sure that the information
I think it's openly out there, isn't it? Sorry to cut across to you, Rachel.
No, that's fine.
And I'm just looking to Josh or James, because this is Alison's work, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Yes, so it is out there. It is, Josh, you can maybe chip in as well, but it is on the Knowledge platform, isn't it? As one of the,
Okay.
I think, but it also, we can put the link. I'll try and find the link to put it in the chat, but it is out there. It's available. So and there's also a handy sort of tutorial video starring myself and my colleague Alison, just talking people through how it works, what's in it, really. So an added bonus for you all. But
that's
Josh,
actually very helpful. I actually watched the video, James, and it is actually very helpful, very watchable.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. Josh, that's right, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, the NHP platform hasn't gone live yet. The evidence map, I think, is accessible, but we would caveat that we're still developing the taxonomies to make it more and more navigable, basically, and searchable, because we're trying to work on its alignment to the activity mitigators, because obviously we have a set of activity mitigators and we've done literature reviews and brought that together, but that still needs more to make it more succinct on that. So, but I'm just trying to find the link, and I'll drop it in as soon as I can find it. But yeah, feedback will be really useful on that.
Thanks,
Josh. That's a very sensible answer. Yeah, Peter, over to you.
Two things. Why we all got different planning horizons when NHP have an expectation of when they not made a judgment on where our planning horizon should be? Because it's not confusing, because you've obviously annualized it, but it's just a question. I don't probably need an answer, but it's a bit strange that we know we're doing 2037, 38, and some next door's doing 2040, 41. Just why aren't we doing all the same?
I think, no, Peter, it's a good question. I think that conversation is happening within NHP. I don't have a response for you on that one.
That's right.
But no, it's a very sensible suggestion, and I think people are considering how best to do that.
I've got no questions, probably to Jake, really, regarding his toy. Sorry, I forgot what they called it now. But I mean, is this a tool that we can sit with stakeholders and say, right, if you actually did this mitigator and we use the evidence and we say, actually that nationally it says about 5% reduction in these particular patients coming through the front door, would we be able to plug that in at 5% or 4% and it would have that impact? Is that the kind of tool we're talking about? Something that's really quick and not dirty is the wrong word, but it's not as complex as, right, hang on a minute, okay, be back in a couple of days whilst we try and work the model out. I know Jonathan's better than that, 2 days, but it's just that, is it that kind of tool that we can use?
It is, yeah. So it was only originally meant as a one-off, so it's not operationalized or anything, and probably needs work at the moment. So we'll have to but essentially all it does is for each mitigator, it works out how many bed days or spells are relate to that mitigator, and it's just a very quick calculation of, if you avoided 10% of those bed days, this is what it means in terms of how many you'd avoid, and it does a quick conversion into beds, just using, again, a very basic calculation of bed days divided by 365 divided by an indicative occupancy rate. So yeah, it needs work to be able to plug in assumptions, but that's not a big task, so we can think about how we do that.
It just might help when we're looking at mitigators, and actually we know that out of the 92, there's only, from a bed day point of view, because that's the currency, as I keep saying, then we don't have to spend loads of time working on actually this particular patient group, and we're going to put loads of money in commissioning different services for them when actually it doesn't make any difference to us. Yep. It might do those patients by you, but actually, we're in the current game of actually right sizing the hospital. So it would, I think it may well help that, because there's only 40 mitigators that make a real impact on the number of beds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
I understand in the way that it was used, that is exactly the impact that it did have, and it was able to relay the information to stakeholders in the room easily, that the scale. The scale. Yeah. So look at this.
That's all it is, yeah.
Because you could spend, like you say, an awful lot of time talking about something which is going to give you half a bed, and you don't really want to be doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I've dropped a couple of links in the chat, but again, as Karen said, we'll follow up with the links in an email following this as well. So don't worry if you miss it for now. Are there any other further questions or points before we just draw things to a close? everybody's wowed with the amount of information.
Go
Peter,
on then.
again,
I'm going to ask this question. I think
Why
it's
not?
been
Go on.
answered in an email, but it's probably one for Karen as well. When are we going to get the next model so that we can start with it? Because obviously we're presumably going to be updated with 23, 24 data.
Yeah, we're working on it. So our great colleague Chris is going through the tortuous IG process. All the work's been done to the model by the data science team to prepare for it, because there was a big change in HES data structures for 22-23 data. So we've done all the work, so it's ready to take it. The IG people, I understand, are being very positive about how quick we might be able to get the IG will be in place. But any of you that have been through getting data and IG before will know that this piece of string could be very long. So we're doing everything we can. We're working really hard on it. Please be assured it's at the top of our priority list so that we can start modelling. We do have 22-23 data, but our preference is to use 23-24 because I think for all of you that will be so much better. And it's beyond COVID then, isn't it? You know what I mean? You are beyond the COVID.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen.
No worries.
Great, thanks, Karen. Anything finally just before we close?
I would just say, James, sorry,
Josh,
just to go on Peter's point about the prioritisation, we have been trying to get more toward a definitive list of those kind of big hitters in terms of what cashes out on bed days. But as you can imagine, with the local contextual factors, that won't be standard across schemes, and therefore it will be heavily caveated. And we've been a little bit reticent to do it because obviously if you put out a kind of top 30, and for some trusts there will be some not in there that would be quite big, and so very much it will be that idea that a bit of a guide, but also because of the accumulation effect, it's always worth considering all mitigators, but obviously you want to prioritize time and resource. But yes, we can try and do a little bit more to guide schemes with that.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you, Josh. Thanks to everyone who has presented things today and helped explore those things, and thanks to you all for attending. Some really helpful questions and points and discussion there. And I wish you the rest of the day, a good rest of the day. There's not many hours left, so that's another incentive. But thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
It's good to see you all. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.